Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Hell. Over the last few years, there's been a resurgence in the interest of Shin Megami Tensei. You'd be surprised to learn at some point that Persona games were once a fledgling spin-off of said brand, and after enough installments, spread its wings to become its own thing. Eventually, whether out of morbid curiosity or the desire to play more, players begun to revisit the extensive back catalogue of Atlus RPGs, such as Digital Devil Saga, Strange Journey, and the topic of this review, Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne. For the European and Australians playing at home, you'd know Nocturne as Lucifer's Call instead. Now, it took them some time, but Sega and Atlus caught light of the game's steadily increasing notoriety, and in response, delivered a revised version of the game available for current generation consoles known fully as Shin Megami Tensei 3 Nocturne HD Remaster. My god, what a mouthful. To refer to the collective online response to its initial announcement as bonkers would be a vast understatement, but as we approach the eve of its release, was the wait worth it? Now, there's a lot to unpack here, but first, let's get some of the uninitiated up to speed. Now, Shin Megami Tensei 3 Nocturne HD Remaster is exactly what it says on the tin. It's a revamped version of the widely celebrated PlayStation 2 RPG released way back in 2003. You play as a boy who finds themselves on the cusp of the world's end, along with your teacher and a few friends from school. While a large portion of the world's inhabitants and cities perish during this event, it is then populated by demons and souls of the deceased. You end up surviving the culling, but you emerge as a demi-fiend, not quite human but not quite demon. You're tasked with exploring a ravaged, inverted version of Earth known as the Vortex World. At this point, the world is effectively in purgatory. It's a state in which it prepares itself for recreation at the hands of a being with a strong sense of conviction. Throughout your travels, you eventually come across Chucklehead 1, 2, and 3, who after reading too many Friedrich Nietzsche books, each seek to rebuild the world in their own name. And it's up to you as the Demi-Fiend to either help or hinder their visions as you see fit. Now, if you've played a mainline SMT game before, you probably know exactly what you're getting yourself into. Though if you've come from a series like Persona and you're curious about jumping in, know that SMT3 will feel a bit different in certain fields like presentation and structure. The story moves along at a faster pace compared to other SMT titles thanks to its tendency to isolate the player, and the largely philosophical themes provide commentary on society and humanity from a collective macro level. This is what's generally known as a hallmark of the mainline SMT games compared to, say, a game like Persona 5, where these beats usually play second fiddle to character development. While I wouldn't say one approach is leagues better than the other, though I do slightly prefer the pacing and ambiguous nature of Nocturne compared to the other games, and in the HD remaster it's accentuated with the addition of voice acting and revised dialogue. The touched-up script fits the tone of the game well, but more impressively, the voice acting behind the demons and major characters sound exactly the way you thought they would if you played the original release on PS2 almost 20 years ago without any voice acting whatsoever. That also goes for both Japanese and English voice tracks, which is by no means an easy thing to do. Though conversely, attempting to recapture the 18-year-old aesthetic of a 6th generation console game has some drawbacks as well. If we're talking specifics, I can't help but draw attention to the low quality of the background music. Longtime Atlus composers Shoji Meguro and Kenichi Tsuchiya are no strangers to producing incredible soundtracks to games like Trauma Center, Catherine, and Persona, but Nocturne holds a very special place in my heart. Effortlessly combining notes of industrial, jazz, and synth to complement the game's unrelenting sense of tension, I was excited to hear in crisp, high-definition audio. Sadly, the music quality seems to be retained from the PS2 release in all its compressed, low bitrate glory. This is particularly apparent with most of the battle themes and vocal tracks, where the compression is most noticeable. As DLC, there are some additional tracks you can use from SMT 1, 2, 4, and 4 Apocalypse, which are much better quality, but they only trigger when fighting enemies in the world map. Hopefully this is something that is fixed in a patch down the line, replacing the low quality tracks with the masters, but as it stands, doesn't do justice to this HD remastered variant. At the very least, the visual aspects of this game do a slightly better job at living up to expectations. Environments sport better draw distance, and textures are a lot better for characters and demons alike. The user interface is minimalist and clean, readjusted to fit a 16:9 aspect ratio, and is quite pretty to look at in a strange, understated way. While most of the pre-rendered cutscenes cannot adhere to this ratio change, games that were released around 2003 were made to be presented in 4:3, so it's the best you could ask for considering the circumstances. What's less excusable is the performance of the game, particularly in combat. Now, don't get me wrong, exploration is fine, even if it runs at a locked frame rate, but once combat comes into play, it can get very messy. Now, I played the HD remaster on Switch, so I knew exactly what I was in for. It is a console that has some problems dealing with particle effects, and I understand that completely. However, on the other side of the coin, it's a bit hard to make excuses for the remaster of an 18-year-old game that will hit single-digit frames as soon as I cast Heatwave. Seriously, the footage you see right here is completely undoctored and raw. Now, the saving grace here is that Nocturne is largely a turn-based game with no reactive time-based elements, so the performance here isn't as important to the experience as, say, a character action game like Devil May Cry, or an action RPG like Ys: Oath of Felghana. I was willing to forgive it based on that, and the fact that the Switch version is the only release that can be played portably, but if running a turn-based RPG at a consistent frame rate is higher on your priority list, I'd recommend playing on PC or PlayStation 4 instead. As it stands, performance on the Switch version leaves a lot to be desired. Despite that, the gameplay of Nocturne is what's billed as the head-turner of the whole package. The mainline SMT series has built a reputation over the years for being completely unyielding, and Nocturne is no exception to this rule. Through its carefully curated set of demons, abilities, and builds to experiment with, Nocturne is as intoxicating as it is challenging. Exploration is performed through the sweeping world map and dungeons where you scavenge for items, avoid traps, and speak to the small pockets of communities that remain after the world ends. But the real meat is in the combat. SMT Nocturne employs the press turn battle system, where landing successful critical hits or exploiting enemy weaknesses allow for additional turns to be used or passed on to other members of your party. This might not seem groundbreaking at first, but knowing that the system can also be exploited by powerful bosses and even low-level monsters ups the tension in almost every fight in the game. It keeps you alert and engaged from the moment you start the game, and while the game can be difficult at times, it never feels unfair, as it all comes down to your understanding of Nocturne's mechanics and taking solace in the notion that what the AI can do to you, you can do right back to them. Demon negotiation is another important aspect of Nocturne, where you influence demons to join your cause by giving them gifts of items and money, and potentially answering any questions they may have. While some of the earlier SMT games allowed for negotiation before a fight, Nocturne proceeded to shake things up a bit, and allowed talks during battles, and opens the floor up to a wide range of possibilities. For instance, some demons of similar type will interrupt your attempts at negotiation because they're looking out for their friends. Other demons will approach you first to chat, and there are certain negotiation skills obtainable that will be more successful depending on personality traits. For example, a female demon using Seduce will be more successful on a male demon depending on their personality. The whole process feels a little more fluid in Nocturne compared to a game like SMT2, and it's no surprise that games like Digital Devil's Saga and Persona 5 use Nocturne as a blueprint for their systems going forward. To complement negotiation, Demon Fusion accounts for most demon growth and negating the need for grinding, seen as a calling card for most RPGs, particularly ones that released around the same time Nocturne did. Demons are generally scaled to level up slower than the Demi-Fiend, so a good understanding of fusing demons is a trait that the game will hammer into your head in due time. While only able to hold a handful of demons at one time, it's generally encouraged to consult your demon fusing experts at the Cathedral of Shadows to allow higher XP boost rates and to ensure you can fuse monsters to suit enemy weaknesses and strengths as you go from area to area. Now, while you can't fuse demons with the Demi-Fiend himself, his power derives from equipable Magatama that can be collected as you play through the game. Each Magatama will tune you to a different set of elements that suit your stats, and as you level up, will give you a list of inheritable skills corresponding to what type the Magatama is. For example, there are Magatama that will allow you to learn support spells to buff your party, healing spells, or my personal favourite, which is Unga Unga Me One Punch Demon Harder, Magatama that significantly boosts your physical attacks but leave you susceptible to status ailments is there too. It's a great system that you always need to be reactive to due to the nature of the game, and when the mechanics eventually click, clever choices in combat and demon fusion are rewarded handsomely. Thankfully, Nocturne HD Remaster decides to keep all of the original challenge and flow intact, save for a few amendments that range from player choice to quality of life changes. First off, the major switch is being able to manually define skill inheritance like you would in more recent modern SMT games. While this might not be a big deal for new players, this is a nod for people willing to revisit, now preventing the need to constantly cancel fusion confirmations to get the right combination of skills that you want. On the other side of the coin, Merciful Difficulty is added in case the base game is too difficult, and the Maniacs DLC pack allows you to access both the Maniacs Edition and Maniacs Chronicle Edition of Nocturne, which featured Dante and Raito respectively. The downside here is that aside from the manual skill inheritance changes, these aforementioned features are paid downloadable content separate from the base game. As of this review's publishing, it's also worth noting that the vanilla version of Nocturne is only made available on the Steam release, the version without Fiend Fights and the Amala Labyrinth. Most players might not be too concerned with the vanilla version as it technically contains less content than the other versions, but if you're itching to
play a real Shin Megami Tensei game,
I advise playing the Steam release above all others. So, where do I stand with SMT3 Nocturne HD Remaster? In short, it's an excellent game that people should attempt to play at least once in their life, but as far as the HD Remaster treatment goes, it's not perfect. Despite some concerns around game performance and sound quality of some tracks, the base version of the HD Remaster is still palatable for experiencing what I would consider one of the greatest RPGs in history. From its release and even today, Nocturne is a game that marches to the beat of its own drum and will no doubt spur a new generation of hardcore RPG enthusiasts. The additions like a rewritten script, voice acting, and manual skill inheritance sweetens the deal, but ultimately it all comes down to how much you can tolerate some of the strange design quirks that the HD Remaster brings. For more Shin Megami Tensei related content, be sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel at youtube.com/NewGamePlusTV. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you next time.